Season 12, A New Dawn. Chapter 1, The Fractured Horizon. Celine stood at the edge of the world, the wind whipping through her hair, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. Before her lay a land in ruins, a world that had just begun to heal after the destruction of the void and the closing of the rift. What should have been a time of peace felt fragile, as if the very air held its breath, waiting for the next disaster to strike. The world was recovering, yes, but it was still broken. Magic, the force that once shaped everything, was gone. And with it, the structure that had held society together had crumbled. The old power systems had fallen apart, leaving a vacuum that no one seemed able to fill. It was a strange new era, one that felt unfamiliar and unnerving. Without magic, the people were forced to redefine themselves, to find new ways of building and governing, of surviving. The land was scattered with remnants of once great cities, now just echoes of what they used to be. Celine had fought so hard for this peace, but it felt more like a fragile illusion than a lasting truth. The scars of the void's destruction were still fresh in the soil, in the hearts of the people, and in Celine herself. The weight of rebuilding was almost too much for her to bear. Could they ever truly return to the peace they had fought for? Was it even possible to recreate a world that had been so thoroughly fractured? She didn't have the answers, but every day she was reminded of the impossible task ahead. The factions that had emerged in the wake of the collapse were divided, each with their own vision of what the future should look like. Some wanted to restore the old ways, clinging to a time when magic was the law of the land. Others, however, saw the destruction of the void as the birth of a new world, one where magic had no place. They believed that the only way to truly rebuild was to leave behind the old ways and forge something new, something that didn't rely on the power that had led to the fall of the world in the first place. As Celine moved through the scattered cities and villages, she saw the growing tension between these factions. There were whispers of new alliances forming, of secret meetings held in the dead of night. Some sought to tear down the world they had fought to save, while others clung to a past that could never be reclaimed. And yet, there were those, perhaps the most dangerous, who sat in the shadows, waiting for the moment when they could seize control, when they could remake the world in their image. Celine, who had once fought as a leader of the rebellion, now found herself in a different role, that of a leader trying to heal. But the process of healing was never simple, never straightforward. There were those who resented her vision, who believed that without magic, the world was doomed to fall apart. The voices of the discontented grew louder with each passing day, questioning her decisions, undermining her every move. How could she lead when there were so many who wished for the return of the power they had lost? The burden of leadership was heavier than Celine had ever imagined. There were times when she would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was doing the right thing. Was her vision of a world without magic truly the best path forward? Was she blind to the deeper truths that others seemed to see so clearly? The absence of Darius, her former mentor and guide, made everything harder. She often caught herself longing for his wisdom, his steady presence, but he was gone, taken by the very chaos they had fought to end. And then came the rumors, the whispers of a new faction rising from the ashes of the old world. This faction, calling themselves the Eclipse, believed that the only way to restore balance to the world was by resurrecting the lost magic, no matter the cost. They didn't care about the destruction the void had wrought. To them, the return of magic was the only way to heal the wounds of the world. To them, magic wasn't just power, it was salvation. The Eclipse, led by a charismatic figure named Vega, began to attract followers, rallying the disillusioned, the lost, and the desperate. Celine had heard their message, and it terrified her. They were not just advocating for the return of magic. They were willing to risk the very fabric of reality to restore what had been lost. And with them came a dangerous belief that the world could never truly be rebuilt without the very power that had destroyed it. As the days turned into weeks, Celine's path became even more uncertain. The world was divided, each faction fighting for a different vision of the future, and her efforts to unite them seemed to grow more futile with each passing day. The rift between the old ways and the new grew wider, and Celine found herself at the center of it all, trying to hold a broken world together with the strength of her will alone. But what if her vision was flawed? What if the future of the world didn't lie in rejecting magic altogether? What if the Eclipse were right, and the only way to restore balance was to bring back what they had lost? Celine didn't know the answers, and she wasn't sure she ever would. The road ahead was uncertain, and each decision she made seemed to carry the weight of the world. The people looked to her for guidance, for hope, but she wasn't sure she could provide either. The peace they had fought for felt more like a fragile dream than a reality, and she wasn't sure how long it would last. In the end, Celine had to come to terms with the fact that there was no easy solution. The world was fractured, and the future was uncertain. She could only hope that, in the end, the choices she made would guide them towards something better, something stronger. But in that moment, as she stood at the precipice of a new world, the future seemed as broken as the land beneath her feet. Chapter 2. The Weight of Leadership. Celine felt the weight of her decisions pressing down on her more with each passing day. The burden of leadership, once something she had longed for, now felt like a yoke around her neck. The world was fractured, torn between the memories of magic's glory and the harsh reality of a new order that existed without it. Every choice she made seemed to invite scrutiny, and the voices of doubt grew louder with each step she took. Her allies, once unwavering, now questioned her every move. Kaelin and Leora, the closest to her during the rebellion, still stood by her, but even their loyalty couldn't ease the tension that surrounded them. They saw the future in the same way she did, one where the remnants of the past had to be left behind for the world to survive. Yet even they couldn't escape the whispers, the doubts that began to sprout like weeds in the cracks of their fragile alliance. Celine found herself increasingly isolated as more and more of the rebellion's leaders began to speak out against her decisions. They had followed her once, in the hope of creating a world without the void, a world that could heal. But without magic, how could they rebuild? How could they create something better without the very power that had once shaped their world? The rift between Celine and the others was widening. She had hoped that, with time, they would come to see things her way, that the old systems, the old powers were better left behind. But instead, the loss of magic had left them adrift, and some were beginning to question whether they could even survive in a world that no longer bent to their will. For some, the fight for the future had become a fight to reclaim the past, and those who sought to restore magic were growing in number and fervor. One of the loudest voices against her came from a new faction that had begun to gain momentum, the Eclipsed. Led by the enigmatic and charismatic Vega, the Eclipsed were a growing threat, rallying those who mourned the loss of magic and who believed that only by bringing it back could the world truly be saved. They promised power, the return of what had been taken, and the restoration of the balance that had been destroyed by the closing of the rift. Their message was simple but dangerous. Without magic, the world was doomed. The threat of the Eclipsed grew with each day, but even more troubling was the way their ideas began to resonate with many of Celine's former allies. It wasn't just the people outside her inner circle who were swayed by their rhetoric. Even those who had once fought by her side began to question whether the loss of magic had been worth it. They were disillusioned, unsure of the future, and desperate for a return to something they understood. Celine couldn't help but feel the weight of those lost souls. They were lost in a world that no longer made sense to them, clinging to the remnants of something that had once been a foundation for their lives. Magic had been the heart of their society, their power, their strength. Without it, they felt vulnerable, exposed. As the pressure mounted, Celine found herself turning inward more often, questioning everything she had worked for. Had she made the right choice in shutting down the void? Was there another path, one that could somehow restore balance without risking the chaos that had followed in the wake of the rift's closure? But there was no time for doubt. The world was still teetering on the edge, and her people looked to her for answers. In her darkest moments, she found herself wishing for guidance, for the steady presence of Darius, who had once been her mentor, her anchor. But Darius was gone, and now she was the one who had to lead. The responsibility, the weight of it, was suffocating. Kaelin had once told her that the heart of leadership wasn't just about making the right choices. It was about standing firm in the face of impossible odds, trusting that the path she was forging would lead to something greater, even if it wasn't clear. But as time passed, those words felt like a distant memory, as if the world itself was moving too fast for her to keep up. One evening, as Selene walked through the quiet halls of the council, she was met by Leora, her old friend and confidant. Leora's eyes were filled with concern, and Selene knew the conversation that was about to unfold would not be easy. "Selene," Leora began, her voice softer than usual, "the others, they're starting to doubt you. They're asking if this world, this new world, can really survive without the magic that once defined it." Selene closed her eyes, the weight of Leora's words sinking deep into her chest. "I know, but what choice do we have? The rift is closed. Magic is gone. We can't go back." Leora shook her head, her brow furrowing. "I don't think they want to go back, not exactly. They need something to believe in. And right now, you're the only one holding on to that belief. But the pressure, Selene, it's getting to them." The silence between them stretched, filled with unspoken understanding. Selene had known this moment would come. The moment when the people would begin to question whether the world they were trying to build was worth the cost. She couldn't give them magic. That was the one thing she knew for certain. But could she give them something else? Could she offer them hope without the thing they had once relied on? "I've lost so much," Selene murmured, her voice barely a whisper. I thought if I could make the void go away, if I could end the war, everything would be okay. But now it feels like it was all for nothing. What if I've made a mistake?" Leora stepped forward, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You didn't make a mistake. You did what you had to do. But sometimes the hardest thing isn't making the right choice. It's living with the consequences of that choice." The words stung, but they also struck a chord deep inside Selene. She had done what she thought was best, but the consequences were far more complicated than she had anticipated. She had hoped the world would heal quickly, that the people would adapt. But the truth was they were lost, and they looked to her for guidance, whether she had the answers or not. And then came the rumors. Whispers of a new rebellion, not one led by those who had followed her vision, but one led by those who had never believed in it to begin with. The Eclipsed were gaining momentum, and their message, their promise of a return of power, was a siren call to those who felt abandoned in a world that no longer seemed to care for them. The weight of leadership pressed harder on Selene's shoulders. How could she stop a new revolution when even her own people seemed ready to turn away from her? The rebellion, once united in purpose, was now fractured, and Selene realized that, no matter how hard she fought to hold the pieces together, there would always be those who believed that her vision of a magicless world was the wrong one. She could only hope that, in time, they would come to understand the true cost of the power they sought to reclaim. But deep down, Selene feared that this was only the beginning of the true test that lay ahead. Chapter 3. Old Scars, New Threats. The tension in the air felt thick, like the oppressive weight of an impending storm. Selene couldn't shake the feeling that the world was on the brink of something far darker than anyone had anticipated. The fractures that had begun to appear within her own ranks were just the beginning. As the weeks went on, the cracks in the fabric of their fragile peace only seemed to deepen. The Eclipsed faction, led by the elusive and dangerous Vega, was not the only threat that loomed on the horizon. There were whispers of other groups, more insidious and more dangerous, stirring in the shadows. The old wounds, those that had been inflicted during the days of the Void, were reopening, threatening to unravel all the progress they had made. Selene knew that if she didn't act quickly, everything they had fought for could be lost. The memories of the Voidborn were still fresh in the minds of those who had survived their attacks. Selene had seen firsthand the devastation they could cause, the way they had torn apart the very fabric of reality in their twisted bid for power. Though the Voidborn had been decimated in the final battle, their influence hadn't disappeared. There were still remnants of their cult scattered across the land, scattered but not defeated. And from the darkest corners of the world, old enemies were beginning to stir. Celine's first sign of this new threat came from a seemingly innocuous village near the borderlands. The village had been one of the first to rebuild, its people grateful for the newfound peace. But when Celine and her small group of scouts arrived, they found the village in a state of chaos. Buildings were burned, crops destroyed, and the villagers themselves were nowhere to be found. After speaking with a few survivors who had managed to escape, Celine learned that the attack had been sudden and brutal. It was clear that the Voidborn, or some new faction in their image, had returned. They had left no sign of who they were, but the scars on the land were unmistakable. Celine's heart sank as she realized the world was not as healed as they had hoped. The battle against the Voidborn may have ended, but their influence, like an ancient curse, lingered on. Her thoughts were interrupted by Kalen, who approached her with a grim look on his face. "There's something you need to see, Celine," he said, his voice low and urgent. "We found a clue, something that could be tied to the Voidborn, or worse." They followed him to a small, abandoned hut on the outskirts of the village. Inside, they discovered remnants of a ritual, an ancient and dark one. Symbols carved into the floor, remnants of what appeared to be a magical ritual circle, and an artifact at its center, a black crystal pulsing with a faint, ominous glow. "Is this?" Leora began, but the words died in her throat as she recognized the artifact. It was unmistakable. The dark crystal was a relic of the void, a symbol of the power that had once ripped the world apart. But this wasn't the same as the abyssal core. This was something different, something far older, perhaps even more dangerous. "We need to get rid of it," Celine said, her voice sharp and commanding. She could feel the weight of the crystal's presence, like a shadow pressing against her chest. It was calling to something deep within her, something that terrified her. But even as she spoke those words, Celine knew the truth. Destroying the crystal wouldn't be enough. There was a larger force at work here, something that wanted to see the world torn apart once more. And as much as she hated to admit it, she couldn't do this alone. The scars of the past were too deep, and the enemies they faced were too powerful. The next few days were a blur. Celine gathered her most trusted allies, including Kalen, Leora, and a few others who had once fought in the rebellion. They traveled from village to village, following the trail of destruction left in the wake of this new threat. But the signs of the Voidborn were not easy to find, and those they spoke to were too afraid to give up any information. The cultists had grown clever, hiding in plain sight, blending in with the people they once sought to dominate. It wasn't until they reached an ancient temple, deep in the forest, that they found the truth. Hidden within the crumbling stone structure was an altar, a massive stone slab etched with symbols that Celine had only ever seen in the darkest corners of forgotten history. The symbols were unmistakable. They were Voidborn markings, the same ones that had been used to summon the power of the Void during its reign of terror. Leora stepped forward, her hand hovering over the altar. This is where it all began. The Voidborn were not just cultists. They were the keepers of something far worse, something that came from beyond this world. They wanted to tear open the rift again, to let the void consume everything. "And now someone else is trying to do the same," Celine said, her voice low and filled with dread. She could feel it now, the presence of something ancient, something alive within the very stones of the temple. It was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they continued to investigate, they uncovered a horrifying truth. The Voidborn were not truly gone. They had simply gone underground, gathering strength and followers. But there was something more insidious at play. There was a new leader rising in their ranks, a figure shrouded in mystery and darkness, who was intent on finishing what the Voidborn had started. The leader's name was Riven, and he was a force to be reckoned with. Rumors of his rise had spread like wildfire, but no one knew for sure who he was or what he wanted. What they did know was that Riven had a singular purpose: to open the rift once more, to bring the void back into their world, and to remake the world in its image. His followers, those who had once been loyal to the Voidborn, now rallied under his banner, united in their goal to see the world plunged back into chaos. Celine knew that Riven was the greatest threat she had ever faced, and the fact that he had already gained so much power, so many loyal followers, meant that time was running out. As she looked out over the temple, a sense of urgency filled her. She had to act quickly before the scars of the past consumed everything they had fought for. The world was already fractured. The rifts, though closed, were still felt, shifting, pulling at the very fabric of reality. And now, with Riven's rise, the true test was about to begin. In the quiet of the temple, as the shadows of the past seemed to stir around them, Celine made a vow to herself. She would stop Riven, no matter the cost. Chapter 4. Beneath the Surface. The deeper Celine ventured into the unknown, the more she felt the weight of the world pressing against her. The threat of Riven and the Void-born lingered in her mind, but something else was beginning to take shape, something that required her attention, something from beneath. It was the Tideborn. Rumors had circulated for months about the Tideborn, a mysterious sea-dwelling faction that claimed to possess ancient knowledge about the origins of the void and magic itself. They were a people of the deep, living in the shadowy depths of the ocean, away from the land-bound conflicts that had ravaged the world. The Tideborn had stayed hidden for centuries, their motives unknown, but their influence was beginning to surface as the rifts in reality continued to distort and fracture the world. At first, Celine had dismissed the idea of journeying to the ocean depths. Her focus was on the land, on the new threats that had begun to stir within the cities and villages. But when the rifts began to grow in strength once more, and when whispers of the Tideborn's knowledge reached her, Celine knew she had no choice but to seek them out. The journey to the ocean was treacherous, the waves violent and unforgiving. As Celine and her group made their way toward the coast, they were greeted by a starkly different world. The sea stretched out before them like an endless, unknown expanse, the horizon seemingly swallowed by mist and the crash of waves against the rocks echoing in their ears. They arrived at a small coastal village, one that had long traded with the Tideborn but had never seen them face to face. The villagers spoke of strange sightings along the shore at night, figures emerging from the water, voices singing beneath the waves. They were tales of fear and reverence, as the Tideborn had always remained elusive, like a shadow beneath the surface of the sea. The leader of the village, an older woman named Elsa, guided them to a hidden cove where the Tideborn were rumored to make contact with the land. The air here was thick with salt and mystery, and Celine could feel the strange pull of the ocean. It was as if the sea itself was alive, watching them, waiting. As they made their way deeper into the cove, the water began to glow, an eerie, bioluminescent light shimmering beneath the surface. The air grew colder, and the ocean's roar seemed to quiet, replaced by a strange hum that vibrated in Celine's chest. It was then that they saw them, the Tideborn. The Tideborn were not like anything Celine had ever imagined. Their skin shimmered with scales that glistened like the surface of the ocean at dawn, their eyes glowing with an unnatural luminescence. They moved with an effortless grace, as though the sea itself was an extension of their bodies. But it was the leader of the Tideborn who stood before them, and she was unlike any creature Celine had ever encountered. Her name was Corin, and her presence radiated power and ancient wisdom. She stood at the edge of the water, her long hair flowing like liquid silver, her expression calm but commanding. Celine could sense that Corin was more than just a leader. She was a conduit for the deep mysteries of the ocean, a being in tune with forces that had long been forgotten by the land dwellers. Corin's gaze met Celine's, and in that moment, Celine felt something stir within her, a deep and ancient recognition. It was as if the Tideborn had always been there, hidden beneath the surface, watching, waiting. "I know why you've come," Corin said, her voice like the sound of waves breaking against the shore. "You seek knowledge. You seek answers to the questions that haunt you." Celine nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her mission. "The rifts, they're growing stronger. I need to understand what's causing them, and if there's a way to stop them before reality itself unravels." Corin's expression softened, as though she had been expecting this question. The rifts are not mere accidents of nature. They're the scars of a world that once was a world shaped by the forces that govern magic. When the void was sealed, it disrupted the balance of the world, causing the rifts to form. But it was not only the void that caused this imbalance. The ocean, the land, the very fabric of reality is tied to the magic that once flowed through this world. And the Tideborn, we are the keepers of that knowledge. Celine's breath caught in her throat. You know how to fix it? Corin stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. Perhaps. But the answer is not simple, nor without consequence. The ocean holds the key to the balance you seek. But the power of the sea is ancient, far older than the void itself. To understand it, you must first understand the origins of magic, and that requires going deeper into the very heart of the ocean. Celine hesitated. I don't understand. The abyssal core, it was sealed. We thought it was the source of all the magic. The abyssal core, Corin replied, was but one piece of a much larger puzzle. It was the focal point, the manifestation of power, but it was never the source. Magic is not just a force. It is a relationship, a balance between land and sea, between the elements that bind the world together. What you must understand, Celine, is that the void was not simply a rift in space. It was a rift in the very fabric of reality, a tearing of the ancient bond that held the world in place. And the ocean, the Tideborn, hold the knowledge of that bond. Celine felt a chill run through her as Corin's words sank in. The ocean, the Tideborn, the magic, it was all part of something far greater than she had ever imagined. If she was to save the world, she would need to understand that balance, to learn how the ocean's ancient power could help mend the rifts before they tore apart everything. But the deeper they delved into the ocean's mysteries, the more Celine realized that some truths were more dangerous than others. The deeper they ventured, the more powerful the ocean's magic became, and soon they would come to understand that the Tideborn's motives were not as pure as they seemed. Beneath the surface, beneath the calm exterior, there were forces at play that even Corin might not fully understand. As Celine and her group ventured further into the depths, they discovered ruins, ancient structures submerged beneath the ocean's dark waters. The ruins spoke of a time long before the void, when magic was at its peak, and the rifts between worlds were not cracks in reality, but gateways between realms. But those who had created these ruins had long since disappeared, leaving behind only their knowledge, their warnings. And with that knowledge came a chilling realization. The ocean wasn't just a source of power, it was a keeper of secrets. Secrets that, if unleashed, could shatter the world in ways that Celine could not yet comprehend. As they explored deeper into the ruins, the first signs of danger began to emerge. Strange, nightmarish creatures began to stir in the dark waters, ancient guardians of the secrets the Tideborn had long since forgotten. They were more than just creatures. They were manifestations of the ocean's own will, defending its deepest and darkest truths. Celine's heart raced as she realized that the deeper they went, the closer they came to unlocking a truth that could either save the world or doom it. Chapter 5: Fractured Reality. The deeper Celine delved into the mysteries of the ocean, the more she felt the fragile foundation of the world begin to shake. It was as if the rifts in reality were growing in strength with every passing moment, pulling at the very seams of existence. The Tideborn had shared with her unsettling truths about the nature of magic, the void, and the ancient forces that still lingered beneath the surface. But the answers they provided only seemed to raise more questions, leaving her feeling more uncertain than ever. Back on land, the signs of reality's decay were undeniable. In every corner of the world, the rifts, those twisted, impossible openings into other worlds, were expanding. The cities that had once flourished in the aftermath of the void's destruction were now struggling to maintain some semblance of order. Time itself seemed to unravel in places, and in others, the very fabric of reality bent and twisted like a cracked mirror. Celine could feel it as she stood at the helm of their ship, staring out at the horizon. It was as if the world itself was being torn apart, piece by piece. The rifts weren't just cracks in the land or disturbances in the air. They were fractures in the very nature of existence. And with each passing day, those fractures seemed to multiply. As the ship cut through the waves, heading back toward the coast, Celine's mind raced. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they had uncovered in the deep, whatever knowledge the Tideborn held, was somehow linked to the rifts. The ocean's magic, ancient and vast, seemed to be part of the cause, not just the solution. The more she thought about it, the more she began to realize that the rifts weren't some external force. They were an intrinsic part of the world's fabric. Something had broken the equilibrium, and now the rifts were trying to pull everything back into chaos. The crew spoke in hushed tones as the ship made its way back to shore, the unease palpable in the air. But the real danger lay not just in the rifts, but in what they revealed. As reality itself began to crack and warp, strange creatures and visions from other worlds started to spill through the openings. Entities not bound by the laws of this world, who existed outside of time and space. They were terrifying, monstrous, and often maddening to look upon. Some were mere shadows, barely seen at the edges of vision. Others were more tangible, terrifying in their unnatural form, capable of slipping into the cracks between worlds and wreaking havoc in the cities. Once they made landfall, Celine wasted no time. She gathered her most trusted allies, Kaelin, Leora, and a few others, and set out to investigate the growing rifts. The world was on the brink of collapse, and with each day that passed, the cracks in reality seemed to grow wider. The remnants of the rebellion, those who had once fought against the Voidborn, now faced a new enemy, the very fabric of the world itself. Celine's first destination was the city of Elmswood, once a thriving hub of trade and culture, now a shadow of its former self. The streets were empty, the air heavy with a sense of dread. As she walked through the city, the signs of reality's corruption were everywhere. Buildings twisted unnaturally, their architecture folding into impossible shapes. Time seemed to stretch and bend at random. In some places, a single second would last an eternity, while in others, entire days passed in the blink of an eye. Celine found the heart of the disturbance near the center of the city, where a massive rift had formed. The rift pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly glow, its edges jagged and irregular. It was as if the very sky itself had been torn open, revealing a vast, dark expanse beyond. "What is this?" Leora whispered, her voice trembling as she stared at the rift. It's like a wound in reality." "It is," Celine said softly, her hand reaching out toward the rift. She could feel the pull of it, the way it seemed to tug at the very core of her being, as if inviting her to step through. She fought the impulse, knowing how dangerous it could be. This isn't natural. The rifts are growing stronger. They're not just cracks in the world, they're windows into other realities. And some of them, they're not friendly. The air around the rift shimmered, and for a moment, Celine saw something dark and grotesque, moving just beyond the edges of the opening. A shadowy figure, humanoid but impossibly distorted, its form shifting in ways that defied comprehension. It was watching them, waiting. Suddenly, the ground beneath them trembled. The rift pulsed again, and from it a horrible, screeching sound echoed. The air thickened with a suffocating pressure, and the very fabric of reality seemed to tear apart at the seams. "We have to close it," Celine said urgently, her heart pounding. But she knew that wasn't going to be easy. The rift was far too powerful, and the forces beyond it were unlike anything they had faced before. The group quickly moved into action, setting up protective barriers and attempting to stabilize the area around the rift. But the closer they got, the more unstable reality became. The landscape around them shifted unnaturally, the laws of time and space warping with every passing moment. In one instant, the city was bathed in sunlight. The next, a storm rolled in, darkening the skies and bringing with it a cold, biting wind. The rift was pulling at everything, distorting time and space with every pulse. "I don't think we can hold it much longer," Kaelin said, his voice strained. "Something's coming through." Celine turned, just in time to see a figure step out of the rift, a creature not of this world. It was a massive, hulking form, its skin a swirling mass of shadows and light. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural fire, and as it took its first step into their world, the ground beneath it cracked, as if the very earth was rejecting its presence. Without hesitation, Celine reached for her weapon. "Get ready," she said, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her gut. "We're not letting this thing through." The battle that followed was chaotic and intense. The creature's power was overwhelming, its strength beyond anything they had encountered before. But Celine and her team fought back with everything they had, using the few remnants of magic they still possessed and the knowledge they had gained from their travels. Each strike they landed seemed to have little effect on the creature, but with each passing moment, the rift's pull weakened. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the rift began to close. The creature screamed in fury as it was pulled back into the darkness from which it had come, its form dissipating like smoke. The rift pulsed one last time before it sealed shut with a resounding crack. For a long moment, there was only silence. "We did it," Leora said, her voice a mix of disbelief and relief. "But how long until it opened again?" Celine shook her head. "Not long. The rifts are not just windows, they're breaches, and they're growing stronger. We need to find out what's causing them before it's too late." But even as she spoke those words, Celine knew that the true nature of the rifts was still a mystery. Each one seemed to be a doorway to a different world, and who, or what, was on the other side was a question that haunted her. The world was fractured, and reality itself was beginning to crumble. The rifts were only a symptom of a much larger problem, one that Celine and her allies would have to face head-on if they hoped to prevent the destruction of everything they had fought for. Chapter 6. The Return of the Wardens. The world was slipping through Celine's fingers, like water pouring through a cracked vessel. Despite the temporary victory at the rift in Elmswood, the battle against the encroaching chaos felt like a fleeting respite. The rifts were not closing permanently, nor was the danger over. Every day, the fabric of reality seemed to tear further, allowing darker forces to spill into their world. And now, the Wardens had returned. Celine had heard of the Wardens in old tales, stories whispered around campfires by survivors of the Great Wars. They were an ancient order of protectors, bound by an oath to safeguard the world's balance and keep the forces of the abyss in check. But their existence had been nothing more than myth, until now. It was Kalen who first mentioned their return. He had come across a gathering of strange travelers in the wilds, remnants of an order that had vanished long ago. They spoke in cryptic terms, claiming to be the Wardens, the guardians of the world's equilibrium. Celine had been skeptical at first. After all, how could an order that had vanished so completely suddenly reappear, especially in a time as dire as this? But when the Wardens contacted her directly, sending an emissary to the capital, Celine had no choice but to listen. The envoy was a man cloaked in dark robes, his face hidden behind a silver mask. His presence was as unsettling as it was authoritative. He claimed to bear urgent news that could hold the key to saving their world. At first, Celine had dismissed the envoy's cryptic warnings, but as he spoke, the weight of his words settled over her like a cold shroud. He told her that the rifts were not just accidents of magic or fractures in reality. They were the result of an ancient evil awakening, an evil tied directly to the abyssal core, a powerful artifact of unimaginable force. The same artifact that had once threatened the world during the time of the Void. The Wardens believed that the abyssal core was a dangerous relic, one that had the potential to heal the world or destroy it entirely. Celine gathered her closest allies in the council hall, and the enigmatic Warden emissary stood before them. His voice, though soft and calm, carried an undeniable authority. The abyssal core must not fall into the wrong hands, the Warden said, his tone grave. It is the source of the imbalance. It is not a tool that should be wielded lightly, for its power can corrupt even the noblest hearts. "What are you saying?" Celine asked, her voice tight with suspicion. "Are you suggesting we destroy it?" The warden's masked face remained unreadable. Not destroy it, but must be secured, kept out of the reach of those who would misuse it. The Void-born, the Eclipsed, and others who seek power, they are drawn to the abyssal core. If they find it, they will unleash forces that the world will never be able to control. Celine's mind raced as she processed the information. The abyssal core had always been a symbol of immense power, one that had played a pivotal role in the downfall of the old world. After the destruction of the Void, it had been thought sealed away, its influence diminished. But now, the wardens were claiming that the artifact's power was far from gone. Who are these wardens? Leora asked, her skepticism evident. And why should we trust you with something so dangerous? The warden emissary's mask glinted as he stepped forward. We were the keepers of the abyssal core before the Void was sealed. We were the guardians of its power, and we're the only ones who truly understand the consequences of tampering with it. Kaelin, ever the pragmatist, spoke next. But why now? Why reveal yourselves at a time like this? The warden's voice lowered. Because the rifts are not a new phenomenon. They are the consequences of the core's power, a ripple effect that began when it was first awakened. The loss of magic, the destruction of the Void, it triggered the core's dormant influence. And now, the balance is tipping. Celine's thoughts swirled. She had always believed the Void was the catalyst for their troubles, that its destruction had created the fractures in their world. But now, it seemed there was more to the story, a deeper, darker truth she had not yet comprehended. Why come to us? Celine asked, her voice hard with resolve. What do you want us to do? The warden stepped forward, his presence looming over them like a shadow. You must protect the abyssal core. You must ensure it does not fall into the hands of those who seek to use it for their own gain. The core's power is not something that can be ignored. It must be contained, kept under the watchful eye of those who understand its dangers. Celine looked around at her allies, Kaelin, Leora, and the others. She could see the uncertainty in their eyes, the weight of the decision they now faced. Could they trust the wardens? Could they risk allowing another group to hold such power? The wardens are not the only ones who want the core, Celine said, her voice calm but firm. Riven and the Eclipsed are after it, too. And from what I've seen, they would use its power to remake the world in their image. The warden nodded, his expression hidden beneath the silver mask. That is why we are here. The Eclipsed are not the only ones who seek the core. There are others who would use its power to plunge the world back into darkness. But he paused, his voice heavy with conviction. We will not allow that to happen. Celine could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The wardens were offering their help, but at what cost? What do they truly want? And could they be trusted to handle something as dangerous as the abyssal core? Despite the doubt that gnawed at her, Celine knew one thing for certain. Time was running out. The rifts were growing stronger, more unstable. Every day that passed brought them closer to the brink of destruction. We will help you, Celine said at last, her voice steady. But we do so with the understanding that the abyssal core cannot be controlled by anyone. If we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic. The warden gave a single, slow nod. Then let us begin. The wardens had returned to claim their place in the world once more, but their true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. Celine knew that the fight ahead would not be easy, and that the wardens were not the only ones with their eyes on the abyssal core. But as she prepared to face the challenges ahead, she understood that the path forward would require more than just strength. It would require trust, sacrifices, and the courage to face the unknown. The world was on the edge of collapse, and the abyssal core was at the heart of all. Chapter 7. The Heart of the Abyss. The journey to the heart of the world was a perilous one. Celine and her allies had faced countless trials before, but nothing could have prepared them for the dangers that awaited deep beneath the surface. The wardens had warned them that the abyssal core was hidden in a forgotten realm, far from the reaches of the surface world, buried in the deepest depths of the earth. The wardens, with their knowledge of ancient paths and hidden places, had led them to the forgotten cavern, an abyss so dark that even the light of the stars seemed to fade when they ventured close. It was a place of deep silence, the kind of silence that pressed against the ears and suffocated the mind. No one had dared to enter this realm for centuries. No one had needed to. But now, with the rifts tearing the world apart, Celine had no choice but to venture into the unknown. The abyssal core had to be found, and it had to be contained before its power destroyed them all. Celine stood at the edge of the vast chasm, looking down into the inky blackness below. The air was thick with the scent of earth and stone, and the ground trembled ever so slightly beneath her boots. The abyssal core was somewhere deep within this ancient place, guarded by trials and dangers that even the wardens dared not speak of. "We've come this far," Kalen said, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "But something feels off. I don't think this place was meant to be found." "I feel it too," Celine replied, her eyes narrowing as she stared into the abyss. There was something unnatural about this place, something ancient and malevolent. The closer they got, the more the air seemed to thrum with power, as if the very earth itself was alive and aware of their presence. Leora, who had been silent for much of the journey, spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. "The rifts, I can feel them. They're stronger here. The further we go, the more unstable reality becomes." Celine nodded grimly. "We have to push forward. We're running out of time." The wardens had led them to the entrance of the cavern, and now it was up to them to navigate its labyrinthine tunnels. The deeper they went, the more disorienting it became. The walls of the cavern shifted and changed, as if the very stone was alive, breathing with an eerie pulse. It was difficult to keep track of time in this place. Minutes felt like hours, and hours seemed to stretch on without end. As they ventured deeper, strange whispers began to fill the air, voices that seemed to echo from the very walls themselves. Celine could not understand the words, but they felt like a warning, a beckoning. The sound of their footsteps echoed louder and louder in the tight corridors, as if the abyss itself was responding to their presence. The further they descended, the more they encountered remnants of the past, fragments of an ancient civilization long forgotten. Ruins lay scattered across the tunnels, their crumbling walls covered in strange runes that pulsed with faint light. It was as if this place had once been a thriving city, a center of power and knowledge, now reduced to dust and shadow. But Celine knew that they weren't just looking for relics of the past. The abyssal core was what they sought, and it lay at the heart of this forsaken place. The journey became increasingly treacherous. The ground beneath their feet seemed to shift with each step, and strange, otherworldly creatures began to stir from the darkness, their eyes glowing with an unnatural hunger. Some were like shadows, barely visible in the dim light, while others were monstrous and twisted, with fangs and claws that glinted in the dark. They were the remnants of a world that had been consumed by the abyss long ago, and they had been waiting, guarding the path to the core. One such creature lunged at them from the darkness, a massive serpent-like creature with scales that shimmered like obsidian. It struck with terrifying speed, its jaws snapping shut just inches from Celine's face. Without hesitation, she drew her weapon, a glowing blade that had once been imbued with the power of the void. Now, though the magic had long since faded, it still cut through the creature's hide with ease, severing its head in a single blow. "We're not alone here," Kalen said, his voice strained as he swung his sword to ward off another creature. "I've known that for a while," Celine replied, stepping forward with determination. "But we can't stop now." As they fought their way through the labyrinth, the air grew thicker, the temperature dropping as if the very heart of the abyss was trying to freeze them in place. They had to move faster. Time was not on their side. Every passing moment felt like a countdown, as if something was waiting for them at the end of the path. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached the heart of the cavern. The walls opened up into a vast, circular chamber, and at its center lay a massive stone altar, bathed in an eerie, pulsating light. The abyssal core was there, embedded deep within the altar's heart, a blackened, crystalline object that seemed to absorb the very light around it. Celine approached cautiously, her breath catching in her throat. The core was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its surface was smooth, yet it seemed to ripple and shift, as if it were alive, breathing in the silence of the cavern. She could feel its power calling to her, beckoning her closer. "This is it," she whispered, reaching out toward the core. But as her fingers brushed against the cold surface, a violent tremor shook the chamber. The walls of the cavern cracked, and a blinding light erupted from the core, illuminating the entire space. The ground beneath them split open, and a deep, guttural roar echoed from the abyss below. Something was awakening. "Get back!" Leora shouted, her face pale with fear. Before Celine could react, the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she was thrown forward, tumbling into the heart of the cavern. As she fell, the world around her began to twist and bend, and she saw the rifts open wide, revealing monstrous forms beyond. The core was not just a power, it was a beacon, and whatever it had been calling to, whatever ancient evil had been bound here, was now free. Chapter 8, A Final Stand. The world seemed to fracture around Celine. The very air around her grew thick and heavy as the abyssal core pulsed with a power that no one could contain. The rifts were tearing open, wider and wider, their tendrils reaching into the sky like dark veins pulling the world apart. Something had been unleashed, something ancient and terrifying. Celine's heart raced as she struggled to regain her footing. The ground beneath her feet was crumbling, the cavern itself groaning in protest to the power being unleashed. She could hear the sounds of the battle behind her, Kaelin and Leora fighting off whatever creatures had emerged from the rifts, their swords clashing against monstrous forms that seemed to come from every corner of reality. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the abyssal core, the thing that had caused this chaos. And whatever had awakened, from the depths of the cavern, a dark figure emerged, its shape shifting and undulating like smoke in the air. It was tall, its body cloaked in shadows that seemed to absorb the very light around it. Its face was hidden beneath a hood, but its eyes glowed with an eerie, malevolent light. Celine recognized the figure immediately. It was Riven. He had come for the abyssal core. His desire for power had led him to this moment, and now he was here to claim it. His followers, the Eclipse, had spread like a plague across the land, and now he stood before her, ready to remake the world in his image. "Riven," Celine said, her voice steady but laced with anger. "You've come to claim the core." Riven's voice was low and cruel, a whisper that sent shivers down Celine's spine. "I've come to save it, to save this broken world. The rifts, the chaos, it's all part of the plan. The abyssal core will heal it, reshape it, and we will have the power to control everything." "You're insane," Celine spat, stepping forward. "You want to use the core's power to enslave the world, to bring back the void." "You can't." "I can," Riven interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "You don't understand, Celine. You never did. The void was not a mistake. It was the world's salvation. And now, the abyssal core will allow me to finish what it started. We will return to the true order, and all will bow before the new world I create." "No," Celine said, her voice unwavering. "This world is not meant to be ruled by anyone. Not by you. Not by the void. Not by anyone." Riven let out a low laugh, his voice cold and full of contempt. "You still don't get it, do you? This world is already dying. The rifts are not some random phenomenon. They are the cracks in reality itself, the symptoms of a world that cannot survive. Only the abyssal core can fix it." "You're wrong," Celine shot back, clenching her fists. "The core doesn't heal, it corrupts. It's what caused all of this." "You're too blinded by your ideals," Riven said, his voice tinged with mockery. "The truth is, there's no other way. The core is the key to salvation. You just refuse to see it." Before Celine could respond, a violent tremor shook the cavern once more. The ground split open beneath them, sending rocks and debris flying into the air. Riven's eyes glowed brighter, and the rifts pulsed with dark energy, threatening to engulf everything in their path. "This is the end, Celine," Riven said, raising his hands toward the abyssal core. "The beginning of a new era. The voids return. Your resistance is meaningless." But Celine didn't flinch. She didn't back down. This was the moment she had been preparing for. She knew what she had to do. Without another word, she drew her blade, the faint glow of the weapon the only light in the overwhelming darkness. The battle had come to its final phase, and this time, there would be no more running. It was time to fight for the future of the world. "Kaelin, Leora now," she shouted. The two of them, already engaged in battle with the creatures that had emerged from the rifts, heard her call and immediately pushed forward to her side. They fought their way toward her, cutting through the monstrous beings that were closing in on them. Riven, sensing their movement, raised his hand. A wave of dark energy shot from his palm, sending Leora crashing into the wall with a sickening thud. Kaelin, however, was quick to react, parrying the blast with his sword before charging toward Riven with a fierce cry. Celine didn't hesitate. She moved forward, meeting Riven's dark gaze with a fierce determination. The two locked eyes, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. "I won't let you do this," Celine said, stepping closer. "This world is worth saving, not by remaking it in your image, but by healing it, not by embracing darkness, but by facing the light." Riven sneered, his eyes flickering with malice. "You talk about light, but you've already failed. You've let the world slip into ruin. The magic is gone. The rifts are here to stay. This is the only way forward." With a sudden movement, Riven lunged at her, his hand crackling with dark energy. But Celine was ready. She moved with fluid precision, blocking his strike with her blade. The clash of their weapons rang out through the cavern like thunder, the force of their blows reverberating through the walls. "I won't let you win," Celine said, her voice a mixture of defiance and conviction. "Not this time." The fight was brutal, each of them pushing themselves to their limits. Riven's power was immense, but Celine was relentless. She had fought for this world for too long to let it fall into the hands of someone like him. In a final, desperate move, Riven summoned the full power of the abyssal core, the dark energy swirling around him in a vortex of chaos. The cavern trembled as reality itself seemed to bend and twist in response. But Celine wasn't afraid. She stepped forward, raising her sword, and with a single, decisive strike, she pierced the heart of the core's energy. The force of the blow shattered the darkness surrounding them, and for a moment, the entire cavern was bathed in a brilliant, blinding light. Chapter 9. The Last Choice. The light was blinding, a flash of brilliance that seemed to freeze everything in place. Celine felt the ground shake beneath her feet as the abyssal core's energy rippled outwards, its dark power shattering like glass. The air crackled with the force of the explosion, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Celine was thrown back, her body slamming into the jagged rocks that littered the cavern floor. Her head spun, and the world around her seemed to blur and fade. The pain was intense, but she forced herself to focus, to rise. The core had shattered, but its power was far from gone. The rifts were still opening, tearing through the fabric of reality itself. Riven, lying on the ground before her, was motionless, his once menacing figure now crumpled and broken. His final assault had consumed him, the dark power of the core turning against him. For a brief moment, Celine felt a pang of sorrow. He had been consumed by his own thirst for power, and in the end, it had destroyed him. But there was no time for mourning. The rifts were still growing. Celine staggered to her feet, her vision still blurry. Her sword was in her hand, but it felt heavier than ever before. Her mind raced as she tried to think, try to make sense of what was happening. The rifts were expanding faster than she could imagine, and soon they would tear the world apart completely. The darkness was closing in, and there was nothing left to stop it. Except one thing. The abyssal core had been shattered, but its power was still there, lingering in the air. Celine could feel it cold, destructive, but also strangely familiar. It was the same energy that had flowed through her during the battle, the same force that had connected her to the world's deepest mysteries. She realized now that the core was more than just a weapon of destruction. It was a conduit, a bridge between worlds. And it had been the rifts themselves that had allowed it to tear open the boundaries of reality. She turned her gaze to the shattered remains of the core, its dark crystal fragments scattered across the cavern floor like broken stars. They pulsed faintly, still alive with energy, and as her eyes locked on them, she understood. The only way to stop the rifts, to save the world, was to make the ultimate choice. She had to take the power of the abyssal core into herself. She had to sacrifice everything. There was no other way. To heal the world, to seal the rifts, she had to embrace the core's energy, absorb its power, and become something more than human. The weight of that choice hung heavy in the air, a pressure that threatened to suffocate her. The thought of losing herself, of becoming a vessel for the dark energy that had caused so much destruction, terrified her. But she knew it was the only way to stop the chaos, to protect those she loved, and to prevent the world from unraveling completely. Her heart raced as she stepped toward the remnants of the abyssal core. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to resist the pull of its power. But she had no choice. The rifts were growing stronger with each passing second, and if she didn't act now, the world would be lost. She knelt beside the fragments, her hand trembling as she reached for the largest piece of the shattered core. As her fingers brushed against its surface, a surge of energy coursed through her body, so strong that it almost overwhelmed her. It was as if the entire world was pouring into her, its raw power crashing through her mind and soul. She gasped, feeling the immense weight of the energy trying to consume her. For a moment, she thought she might break, thought she might lose herself to the darkness that had claimed so many before her. But then, she remembered everything she had fought for, the world she loved, her people, the memories of Darius and the others who had believed in her. She couldn't let them down. Taking a deep breath, Celine pushed forward, letting the energy of the core flow into her. She felt her body shift, her very being bending and warping under the force of the power she was absorbing. The rifts trembled in response, their pull growing stronger, but Celine's resolve only hardened. The power surged within her, filling every fiber of her being. She could feel the rifts, their jagged edges like invisible claws, trying to tear at her. But she held firm, pushing back against them with the strength of her will. Slowly, the rifts began to recede, the darkness retreating as she bent the energy to her will. And then, with one final, mighty push, she sealed them. The rifts, the source of all the chaos, began to close, one by one, until there was nothing left but silence. Celine stood alone in the stillness, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. The energy of the abyssal core still flowed through her, but it was no longer dark or destructive. It was balanced, contained, a power that was hers to command. But the cost had been high. She could feel it. Her connection to the world, to those she loved, was different now. She was changed. As the last rift sealed, the world seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief. The air, once thick with the pressure of impending destruction, lightened. The chaos, the violence, the darkness, it was over. But Celine knew that this was only the beginning of a new journey. The world would heal, but it would never be the same. Magic was gone, but something new had taken its place, a new order, a new understanding. And Celine would be at the heart of it, leading the world into an uncertain future. Her task was far from over. She had saved the world, but now she would have to help it rebuild, to guide it into a new era. The people would need her leadership more than ever, but Celine no longer feared the weight of that responsibility. She had faced the abyss and come out the other side. Now, she would face the future. Chapter 10, A World Reborn. The aftermath of the battle was silent. The world, once torn asunder by the rifts, was now at peace. The abyssal core had been sealed, the forces of darkness banished, and the world's fractured reality mended. But peace came at a price. The war had left scars deeper than any wound, and those scars were not just in the land, but in the hearts of the people. Celine stood at the edge of a ruined city, watching as the first rays of the morning sun broke through the clouds. The city had been a place of great power once, a stronghold for the leaders of the old world. Now it was a shell, its walls crumbled, its streets empty. The buildings, once grand, were reduced to rubble, but the first signs of growth were emerging from the destruction. Small flowers breaking through the cracked stone, vines crawling up the remnants of fallen columns. It was a symbol of what the world could become. Broken, yes, but not beyond hope. She wasn't alone. Kaelin and Leora stood nearby, their faces somber, yet hopeful. Together, they watched as the people of the land began to rebuild. They were starting from nothing, but that was the only way forward. The age of magic was over, but the potential for a new world, one born from the ashes of the old, was just beginning. The air was filled with a sense of quiet purpose. The rebellion had not ended in victory, as they had once imagined, with banners raised in triumph and songs of glory. There was no grand celebration, no feast. Instead, there was work. Hard work. The kind of work that shaped the future. Celine turned to her friends, her closest allies, and smiled softly. "We've done it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The rifts are sealed. The core is gone, but there's still so much to do." Kaelin nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "It's not over yet, but this is a start." Leora stepped forward, her gaze steady. "We've fought so hard. We've lost so much. But this is the beginning of something better." Celine took a deep breath and turned her gaze back to the horizon. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but she no longer felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. She had made the choice, the ultimate sacrifice, and now she was free. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with quiet resolve. "It's a new beginning." But even as she spoke, she could feel the weight of the power still inside her. The abyssal core's energy had not been entirely vanquished. It still lingered within her, a constant reminder of the choice she had made. It was no longer dark, but it was powerful, an ancient energy that connected her to the world in a way that no one else would ever understand. She had become something more than human, something that bridged the old world and the new. But she also knew that her journey wasn't over. The world was healing, but it would need guidance, leadership, and time to recover fully. And as the one who had made the impossible choice to save it, Celine knew that she would be at the heart of that recovery. "Will you lead them?" Kaelin asked, as if reading her thoughts. She met his gaze, her eyes filled with understanding. "I must, but it won't be the same. The world has changed, and I have changed with it." Leora placed a hand on Celine's shoulder. "You've led us through the darkest times. You've saved us. But now, the people will need to rebuild on their own terms. They need more than a leader. They need a guide." Celine nodded. "I will guide them, but they will find their own way. This is their world now. I've done my part." The days that followed were not easy. The world had been shattered, and it would take time to rebuild. Trust was a fragile thing, and many people still mourn the loss of the old world, the world that had been filled with magic, with power, with certainty. Now, there was only uncertainty, a new reality to navigate. But as Celine traveled from city to city, from village to village, she saw hope in the eyes of the people. They were rebuilding not just their homes, but their lives. The scars of war were still fresh, but they were healing. The rifts that had once torn them apart were now just distant memories, fading into the past. And slowly, the new world began to take shape. In the coming years, Celine became a symbol of that new world. She was no longer the leader of a rebellion, nor the girl who had once feared the weight of responsibility. She was a guide, a figure who helped lead the people into a future that no one could have predicted. Magic may have been gone, but something else had emerged in its place, a deeper connection between the people and the world. The lessons learned from the void, from the abyssal core, from the rifts, would not be forgotten. They were part of the world's history, a history that Celine had helped shape. The world was not perfect. There were still challenges to face, obstacles to overcome, and dangers that lurked in the shadows. But the people had learned to adapt, to trust, to rebuild. And so, with the dawn of a new era, the world began again. Selene stood at the heart of that new world, not as a ruler, but as a guide, leading them forward with wisdom, compassion, and the strength of someone who had faced the abyss and emerged stronger for it. The age of magic had ended, but the age of rebirth had just begun.